Your ceiling leaks once, and you call an emergency repairman within the hour. Here's what most people don't know. You don't need freezing temperatures to die of cold. You just need to be wet. A body losing heat through wet skin loses it up to 25 times faster than through dry skin in the exact same air temperature, meaning weeks of rain, even mild rain, at 10 or 15 degrees Celsius, has killed more people throughout history than actual ice-cold winters ever did. Which means for most of human existence, rain wasn't an inconvenience. It was one of the most quietly lethal conditions a person could face. And staying dry wasn't comfort. It was survival, engineered one shelter at a time. For much of human history, in regions across Africa, Asia, and the Mediterranean, seasonal rains didn't mean a wet commute. They meant weeks of continuous downpour, swollen rivers, and ground turned into standing mud, with no roof, no drainage system, and no dry clothing waiting at home. And humans didn't just wait it out. They engineered around it. This will change how you think about what counts as an unbearable week. In 1989, an Israeli archaeologist named Dani Nadel was surveying the shrinking shoreline of the Sea of Galilee after a drought had temporarily lowered the water level and exposed ground that had been submerged for thousands of years. What he found at a site now called Ohalo II was something that should not have survived at all the collapsed remains of a brushwood hut, dated to roughly 23,000 years ago, preserved almost intact because the mud and rising water had sealed it away from oxygen and decay. The structure had been oval, built from bent branches likely willow and tamarisk woven into a dome and covered with brush, centered around a hearth positioned just off-center to avoid smoke buildup in enclosed, damp air. This wasn't a lean-to thrown together for one storm. The layout suggested a structure meant to be lived in, repaired, and rebuilt across an entire rainy season, at a site occupied for what researchers estimate may have been generations. But the hut was only the first piece of the puzzle. It explained where people sheltered. It didn't explain how they survived the flooding that came with it. Roughly 380,000 years earlier, at a site now buried beneath the modern city of Nice, France, a French archaeologist named Henry de Lumley uncovered something that pushed the story back almost unimaginably further. Excavating in 1966 at a site called Terra Amata, de Lumley's team found post holes arranged in clear oval patterns, dated to approximately 400,000 years ago, evidence of deliberately constructed huts, built and rebuilt repeatedly at the same coastal location. Inside several of these oval outlines, researchers found small stone arrangements curving around the hearth, a low windbreak wall, angled specifically to shield the fire from the prevailing wind and rain coming off the Mediterranean coast. That detail matters more than it first appears. 400,000 years before anyone would draw a blueprint, someone had already worked out that fire and rain don't mix, and had built a physical solution, a stone curve, positioned with intention to keep a flame alive while water fell around it. But a windbreak only manages a fire. It does nothing for a structure sitting directly on flooding ground. That problem shows up clearly at a site called Monte Verde in southern Chile, excavated beginning in the 1970s by archaeologist Tom Dillihay. Monte Verde is dated to roughly 14,500 years ago, and like Ohalo II, it survived because of the very conditions that should have destroyed it: a peat bog that waterlogged the site and sealed organic material away from decay for over 10,000 years. What Dillihay's team uncovered was a long structure built from wooden planks, held down at the edges by wooden stakes, with fragments of animal hide still attached to some of the wood, the remnants of a covering that had likely draped over a wooden frame, staked firmly into the ground to keep both wind and rain from lifting it away. Alongside the structure, researchers found preserved plant remains, including species used medicinally in later South American cultures, suggesting the people at Monte Verde weren't just surviving the wet season passively. They were treating illnesses that came with it, in a shelter deliberately engineered to keep floodwater and rain from breaching the space where they slept. But not every solution to weeks of rain came from wood, hide, or stone. Some came from what was already growing overhead. Ethnographic fieldwork, conducted in the 1950s by anthropologist Colin Turnbull, living among the Mbuti people of the Ituri rainforest in what is now the Democratic Republic of the Congo, documented a shelter design called the Mongulu, a dome-shaped hut built from bent saplings and shingled with large Maranthaceae leaves, layered in overlapping rows almost exactly like roof tiles. The leaf shingle method wasn't accidental. Each leaf was placed to direct water outward and downward onto the leaf below it, creating a continuous runoff path that kept the interior dry through rainfall the Ituri region receives for well over half the year. Turnbull recorded these shelters being built and rebuilt in under a few hours, a design refined enough that an entire mobile hunting group could reconstruct full weatherproof housing at nearly every new camp. This wasn't primitive improvisation. It was applied hydrology, executed with material gathered in the time it takes to walk into the surrounding forest. But shelter alone still leaves one problem unsolved, and it's the one modern plumbing quietly handles, without anyone noticing. Where does the water actually go once weeks of rain start pooling around where people live? At Skara Brae, a Neolithic village on the Orkney Islands of Scotland, dated to around 3100 BC and excavated extensively through the 20th century, archaeologists found something remarkable beneath the stone houses themselves: a network of stone-lined drainage channels running under the settlement, connecting individual homes to a shared drainage system that carried water away from living spaces. Some of these channels ran directly beneath what researchers believe were early indoor drains, built into a climate where the Orkney Islands experience significant rainfall across most months of the year. This wasn't a village that tolerated standing water near its homes. It was a village that had engineered, in stone, a system to remove it before it became a problem. The Four Solutions O'Hallows brushwood dome, Terra Amata's stone windbreak, Monte Verde's staked hide covering, the Mbuti leaf shingle roofing, and Skara Brae's underground drainage span roughly 400,000 years and 4 different continents, and none of them were copied from one another. They were independently discovered, over and over, because the problem itself never changed. Water finds every gap. It pools wherever the ground allows it, and a structure that fails to account for both falling rain and rising groundwater doesn't just get uncomfortable, it stops being survivable within days. None of these were isolated tricks, either. They were layered responses to the same threat, refined differently depending on what material the local environment provided. Stone where stone was available. Hide and timber where forests provided both. Leaves where the rainforest itself supplied a renewable, replaceable roofing material faster than any other option could be built. The version of this system you rely on today is almost unrecognizable on the surface, and functionally identical underneath. A gutter and downspout replace Skara Brae's stone channels. A tarp or synthetic roof membrane replaces staked hide at Monte Verde. Roof shingles replace overlapping Marantaceae leaves, arranged on the same overlapping principle the Mbuti perfected without a single power tool. The problem of rain was never solved once. It was solved independently, everywhere humans lived long enough to need a permanent answer. Your ceiling leaked once today, and you called someone within the hour. Someone 23,000 years ago rebuilt a mud-sealed hut on the shore of a rising lake, season after season, because leaving simply wasn't an option, and the shelter they built survived underwater long enough for someone to still be studying it now.